Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here now. I'm very happy that we're all together for the MIGS 2013. And just before the last keynote, I would like to take the opportunity to thank a number of people that helped MIGS 2013 happen. So first, thanks to the FMC. Yeah. And the government of Quebec, who helped us a lot to do this event. I would like also to thank all our partners that have been supporting us through the journey, and also to our media partners and exhibitors. I would like also to give a special thanks to all the advisory board who helped us to put together the program of the sessions, which was very attractive this year, I think, and I hope you liked it. So thank you all, guys. And finally, I would like to announce the winners of the Battle of the Studios. So on Monday, Kid Fox Games, Jungwoo Kim and Shinran Yu. And on Tuesday was Gameloft, Jan Snyder and Mark Desmarais. So congratulations to you. So, just a last word, I'm Clément, I'm the organizer of the MIGS, and now we are working on MIGS 2014, so if you have any suggestions or any comments, things you would like us to improve, just send me an email. I would be happy to discuss with you and make sure it happens next year. So we are looking forward to seeing you here next year, November 10th and 11th, mark the date. Thank you very much, and now please welcome the closing keynote, Do or Die, presented by Richard Rouse.
A video first. Oh, wait. Oh, it's there. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Richard Rouse from, oh, it's still there. I'm a designer from Microsoft Game Studios. And we're doing, this is the third annual MIGS Brain Dump that we do as the closing keynote for MIGS. I want to thank all of you for sticking around for the whole show and sticking around for this. We have something a little bit different than what you've been watching so far. The idea with this is we take a couple speakers who have maybe already talked at the conference that we thought would be particularly good at delivering a lecture here, and then we add some other people.
Take that off Facebook. That's bullshit.
So, and then we find some other people whose pictures we took off Facebook.
You son of a bitch!
Yes, it's a good start.
Facebook and privacy settings.
Superb. And then we have a bunch of other speakers from around Montreal and one from as far away as Maryland who's come up to join us and do this session. And they each get 5 minutes to talk about a subject of their choosing as long as it fits within the theme, and this year's theme is Do or Die. So you might wonder why did we pick this theme for Do or Die for this year? Well, last year, very few people of you will probably remember, except for me and Jason, Della Rocca here, that the theme was the future unknown. And that was because it's a great time of transition in the industry and all these new platforms coming up. We don't know what the next thing is going to be, so we wanted to talk about that last year. So what would the theme that would follow up on that? Maybe something like, all systems go, the idea that, okay, well, we're in the unknown, but let's go for it. And I think the more extreme version of that is Do or Die. So what do I mean by that? What does the Do or Die theme mean to me at this time in our industry? So as you may know, there's a console coming out this week. And then next week, there's another console coming out. This is a very interesting time in the industry because, if we look back at the last generation, there are a bunch of games that have dominated. These are excellent games, that have been through many versions. And actually, the numbers that are on the boxes are actually a little bit of a lie. They're actually on this version of each game. These are great games, right? We've enjoyed them, but when people come to a new console generation, they're ready for new. They're ready for something they haven't played before. So that's what I mean by Do or Die. Now is the time, if you're on one of those giant teams, working on these giant projects, the big console games that get made in Montreal, now's your time to do or die, to commit to something new, to go forward. But maybe you're tired of working on giant teams. Maybe you want to explore something different. Now more than ever, there's more platforms you can go on, and you know all about this, right? You can go use Unity, and that's great. And it's something fairly unprecedented for the first time in history. You can actually be self-published on all the consoles, and they all have fairly lightweight ways for you to get on board with low barriers to entry and all that sort of thing. And this is, as a shameless plug, I will say that I work with the Xbox Indie Game Program. And if you have any questions, you can hunt me down on Twitter or ask me after this or something like that about how you as an indie developer can get on there. But it's also equally easy on the other platforms. So there's really no excuse for not trying something. And as you go do bold new ideas, you know, I want to put in a case for the gamer, right? For thinking, I think there's been a trend over the last few years, the last generation, maybe to keep making things easier, harder to lose, right? That, you know, there's maybe a little less challenge, maybe a little more just let them win all the time, and some of that can be okay, and good user interfaces, we like that. But, you know, I think players are ready for challenge. Now, why do I think that? Well, this year, for the first time ever, I have been playing fantasy football, and this may be surprising to anyone who knows me because I hate football. I don't really know anything about football, but people at the office were doing it, and I was sort of peer pressured into it. And what's interesting about fantasy football, it is really complicated. It's basically managing a spreadsheet and looking at all these predictions of who's going to do what, and all these people have opinions, and it's really complicated. But the other thing is it's really popular. Like, players love doing this kind of stuff. They're not scared away by this. If it's presented in the right format, a subject matter that they love, they can get really into it. And some of the best video games, I think, have started recognizing that. And you can see some games that have embraced, you know, things that don't show everything to you, that let you explore and create your own thing or run up against a really hard challenge. So think about that, too, as you're making new games. We don't need to dumb them down all the time. And I think we often dumb them down to make them easier for us to make than instead of what gamers are demanding. You know, another thing to think about is as you're coming up with a vision, this isn't actually about the Oculus Rift, I just threw it up there because it's kind of cool. But as you're thinking about your forward-looking vision for your project, you got to be careful about who you're listening to, right? And the one thing you shouldn't listen to is focus groups. As Mark Cerny said, a focus group will tell you what was popular 15 minutes ago. And this can be very, very dangerous. If you're trying to do something new and ambitious, often it won't do well. Even Civilization 2, when it came out, they didn't want to do this game. Says, well, that game's not going to sell. Who wants that? The first game didn't do that. Well, why are we doing that? Or Will Wright had to fight tooth and nail to try to make The Sims, because that did terribly in focus groups. And as we all know, games that require peripherals never sell. You can also learn in more recent examples that the adventure game genre is dead, that no one will play a Western, and that everyone online is an asshole, so we can only make shooters for them because that's all they'll like. So that's what I mean. That's good. So that's what I mean when I think do or die. I think it's the time to avoid dying, much like pressing the X button. You just have to choose to do it. And fortunately, many of you here live in one of the best cities in the world for game development, where you can do everything from the giant projects to the small projects and everything in between. So I think now is the time to go do that. Now that there's a great unknown, there are no wrong answers. There's only bold choices to be made. So that's what I meant by do or die. Fortunately, we have 8 other speakers here to tell you what their take on it was. And the first of those is Jason VandenBerghe. He's been a creative director at Ubisoft for some time. A long time ago, he worked on an X-Files game, which I put up there to further mock him. Wow. But what's really funny is I recently made the mistake in working with one of our development partners of referencing the Bartle types. And they say, this is a little joke for the game designers in the room, and I talked about the Bartle types, and they're like, the Bartle types, why are you talking about those? Don't you know about Jason VandenBerghe's player types? And I was like, oh, yes, I do. That Jason VandenBerghe.
Okay, wow. Yeah, that was a while ago. Holy crap. Yes, on the PC, best box ever, which the game had done as well, is the box. Okay, so do or die. So these are my slides. First off, great to be here. Thanks for having me back. I'm going to try and do this in 5 minutes. My interpretation on do or die was this. I thought to myself, okay, if I've got 5 minutes and it's all on me here, okay, what is this? What is the thing that I can tell you in 5 minutes that has had the biggest impact on my ability and my team's ability to be creative, to push new boundaries, to explore, and to work better on new ideas? So this is it. This is what I've got. It's a thing I call, what if we didn't fuck it up, okay? And I know that sounds like a joke. I can tell by the way that you laughed in my face that it sounds like a joke. But it actually is a philosophy. It's a development philosophy. It's a tool. So let's talk about how what if we didn't fuck it up works. You're in this situation. You have an idea. So you're talking about a problem, and someone on your team says, I have an idea. What if we did blah? Okay? And you're sitting in a group environment, and people are talking. And as we do, we start to hear these kinds of responses. Right? We start to get people saying stuff like, well, I don't, well, but I don't know, that's not really the, okay? So these questions, these comments on an idea are all of the same form. They have a similar shape. They fundamentally are an expression of doubt that we might fuck it up. Okay? What you're saying is, I think we should do X. A cool game design idea would be this. And you say, well, I played X before, or something like X, and it kind of wasn't fun because they screwed up this thing. That's true. They fucked it up. So what that person is implying is, I'm afraid that we'll fuck it up if we do that idea. Now, the problem is not the criticism. The problem is what happens next. What happens next is, if you're not sure of yourself, or if you're not bold, you say, oh yeah, maybe we should do something else. And you walk away from it. Don't do that, okay? Don't do that, all right? Because in that moment is where the great ideas that other people have maybe screwed up, but that you might not screw up, can happen, and that's where great innovation happens. So, I have a tool for you to answer. I have crafted a better answer. I've play tested it on my team. It's been working great. Okay? So I'm give you my answer to this situation. Someone says, well, we, blah, 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 what, we might fuck it up. I ask them the following question. I say, okay, yes, it's true. We might fuck it up. Is there any possible future in which we didn't make this mistake? In which this idea did work? Can you imagine a future where this isn't awful? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes it's no, actually, it will never work. In which case, yeah, don't do that, right? But usually the answer is, well, yeah, I guess, if we didn't screw it up, right? I'd say, okay, that's the one I mean. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the 90% of the cases that are awful. I'm talking about the 10% that are great. Would that solve the problem? And in that moment, I have found that the developers' hearts open, their hearts grow 3 sizes, like the Grinch, the whole thing, it happens, they go, my God, yes, maybe it's possible, right? By simply acknowledging this. So, this is simply the question that I ask, right? I've play tested this on my team. I have found that by relieving people of the pressure of having an idea that can't possibly go wrong, but also acknowledging the people who want to say, hey, danger. You say, yes, danger, we understand. Thank you for pointing that out. What if we didn't fuck it up? Okay? It's incredibly powerful, more powerful maybe than you imagine. I hope that you play test it. If you do and you find that it works, or if you find bugs in the system, please contact me and let me know how it goes. That's my talk. Thank you very much.
All right, next up, we have Chris Avellone, who delivered an excellent keynote this morning. He is, I've been a creative director at Obsidian Entertainment for some time, where they recently have their successful Kickstarter. Going back in time, they worked on publisher projects like Knights of the Old Republic 2, and probably most famously, he worked on one of the best regarded narrative games of all time, Planescape Torrent. With that, I give you Chris Avellone.
Well, after Jason's brilliant 5-minute first shot there, I hope I don't fuck this up, which is something that I always ask before having sex with anyone. So when I got the invitation to do this talk, Richard was like, hey, there's a lot of topics you could use for this do or die presentation, but if you don't get me these slides, I will in fact kill you. So I did in fact do this, but one of the topics that he brought up in the opening email was, Chris, some of the topics you could possibly bring up are, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future with regards to consoles. And that reminded me of a conversation we often have around the office from people that are terrified about the technology that new consoles represent. And I want to give some amazing words from our technology director, who is basically boils down to, please shut the fuck up. We've already had to deal with several generations of consoles before. We'll figure it out. Don't worry, we'll get those engines running because history has shown us we'll get past this together. Now everyone just get in here for a big hug. Which is also what I ask before having sex. So one thing that's always worthwhile to do is if you're not certain what the future of consoles is going to represent, why don't you go down a different avenue and go to the players and ask if there's certain types of games they would like to see from you. And I'm not going to once again talk about how much I love Kickstarter, but that's certainly one way to go out there and say, hey, while I'm waiting for consoles to figure out what's going to go on, I'm actually going to go out and ask the players what they would like to see and then deliver it on my beautiful PC. That's what I like. So anyway, ask your players. That's certainly a good source material to go to. And if you don't have a clue for what to do in terms of what's coming on to the next generation of consoles, it's always worthwhile to just go and do it yourself. There are plenty of tool sets out there from a variety of different engines. It's possible to make your own mods, make your own games, blaze your own trail. We had one, and unfortunately, during one question this morning during my keynote, I may have already blown my load when it comes to answering this particular aspect of the presentation, which is something I also do early during sex. But if you go out there and you have an idea for one way to rewrite a game, just go out and do a mod based on it. One of our best world builders went out and completely redesigned Oblivion, for example, and he dumped it out to the public, got a huge player rating score for it. It was fantastic. And so when he finally applied to our studio, he had already done the job before he got the job. And that is certainly something anyone can do at any time. So if you're sitting around firing off applications, firing off resumes, just go out and make a game instead. You can be a developer right now without waiting for anybody. And one last thing I wanted to say is I get really sick of new technologies. Like, they really confuse me, they make me upset. I don't know if they run on batteries, much like many of the things I use during sex. But I don't feel that innovation necessarily has to come from new technologies, new controllers, and new interfaces. And the primary example that I always cite with this is in the fantastic game Fallout 1, which changed many of my design principles with role-playing games, they did something very simple that didn't require anything more than a scripting command. What they would do is in dialogue sequences, they would check to see what number your intelligence score was. And if it was below a certain number, they would change all the dialogue options in the game to reflect the fact that you were not a very smart character. You did not have a very smart approach towards things, much like me during sex. And that was a very simple scripting command. That didn't require any brand new engine technology, didn't require any new forms of tent control, no specialized controller. It just required a new way of approaching a dialogue system that had been around for a while. And it just required a new approach, and that's always worthwhile to consider. And that's all I have to say.
So next up, we have Michael McIntyre, who is a longtime veteran of the Montreal game development scene. Indeed, we worked on a project once together here. He's also worked on everything from Rainbow Six to Prince of Persia, and recently he shipped the latest installment in the Batman Arkham series, Batman Arkham Origins. I give you Michael McIntyre.
Hello, everyone. I love co-op. I grew up with a younger brother who was very close to my own age, and we always played together, and I think this made me a co-op gamer for life. And with the next generation of consoles coming out, it has me thinking about what new things I'm looking for, I'm hoping we put into co-op gaming. I started in the industry as a level designer. I had the fortune to work on a number of Tom Clancy games, Rainbow Six and Splinter Cell. And of course, co-op is a big part of those, and I really loved building those things. But they were all of the variety of co-op that we're pretty much familiar with. Basically, co-op gaming, which is let's put you in a situation that you couldn't survive alone. So it's basically partnership to survive, like Contra, Double Dragon, Turtles, all that. Even a lot of our current games are still of this variety of let's throw a lot of things at them, and they're going to cooperate in order to survive. And we have a lot of cool new games that are coming out for the next generation, like Bungie's Destiny, like Ubisoft's The Division. And it seems like they're going to be doing a lot of cool new things for this. But ultimately, it's still this. It's still the joy of shooting things mixed with this. Like, it's two buddies basically facing the world. And I think there might be an opportunity to do something more. And in order to come up with these ideas, what I do is go back to experiences that I've had as a child and see if I can draw from that. So my brother and I used to play with G.I. Joe action figures a lot. And G.I. Joe was almost like next generation action figures because they could be posed in so many different ways. And this really changed things for us. It went from Star Wars figures who were like, they all guarded like this. They all shot like this. They all surrendered like this. But with G.I. Joe, it had the swivel arm. Like, there was guys that would guard like this or like this. There's guys that would shoot like this or like this, and guys that could surrender like this or like this. And suddenly, we had a way to really express character for each of these toys, and it really opened up a whole new thing for us. And I think there's an opportunity to tap into this for cooperative gaming. Doom was one of the first games that my friends and I played while online. It was a LAN with computers in a different room, and we didn't have headsets, so we couldn't talk to each other. And so we used what gestures we had to communicate. In this case, the knife. We came up with a very simple stabbing system of communication to tell people to stay, or follow, or stab, and then shoot down the corridor where you wanted them to go. And it showed to me that there was a desperation to communicate, and we used whatever gestures we have. And this actually even showed once we got headsets, players still couldn't communicate with, say, their enemies, and so they used what gestures they had to communicate, I have beat you. But I think that if you give the player the option to communicate through gestures, they'll use it. Like, they will say who they are and what they're about. And I think there's a real power there that these are the kind of features that get cut very early and very often. And that I think if someone were to go all out with this, they would find a whole new thing that they could create. Speaking of whole new things that aren't just basically shooting guns with co-op, I think about as a kid, we used to build sandcastles. Well, sorry, I grew up in Canada. We built snow forts, but it's sandcastle building, and there's something about that that's really fascinating to me because we would get really into this, and what I like about it is that there's something inherently cooperative. We are building a sandcastle together. There's nothing really competitive about it. It's like, oh, my tower is better than your tower. No, you both want the castle to be good. And I think there's something that is really powerful in that we could really tap into. Coming back to G.I. Joe, like, there was all kinds of stuff with G.I. Joe, the vehicles and the towers and the guys, and we would do this. We would build these massive camps, and it would take us all day, and then we would admire it for 3 days until our mother said, okay, clean up this mess. Mess. And then we would destroy it. An invisible third faction would come in and destroy everything, and then we would start over. And of course, there are games that have come out recently that have made this their core fantasy. But I think that there's a real opportunity to allow players to invest in the world, to build things, to shape it, make it their own. That will make the cooperative experience not just about survival, but about wanting to build something and something that you want to protect. Like these two guys, like they have a story, you care about them. It's not just two faceless shooters that are like trying to survive an onslaught. These are guys that could very well die and you don't want them to. Another part that I think that players could really cooperate with is having an impact on the story and how another player could have an impact on your story. As kids, my brother and I often would visit and play with two girl cousins that we had. And we would basically play pretend. This was no longer running around shooting each other. Now we're telling stories together. But we would rely on licenses, essentially, to give us roles so we knew what to do. But we had a problem because there was 2 boys and 2 girls. And we would have licenses like Dukes of Hazzard that was 2 guys and 1 girl. So we basically created a character that we called Buttercup. And she was Daisy's sister. So we have Luke Duke, Bo Duke, Daisy Duke, and her sister Buttercup. And Buttercup was great since she was just made out of our imagination. She was kind of fiery, tough, and got us into trouble. So she would drag these known characters that we would be playing into trouble that they normally wouldn't deal with and change the story. And so sometimes we would play with all these different licenses, including another popular one at the time, but we ran into the same problem where it was like, okay, 2 guys and the 1 girl. We were quite young, so we couldn't think of anything new, so we basically just put Buttercup back in again. And it was amazing because she would totally change the story again. This spunky girl came in and was getting our rebels into trouble. And I think that there's a real opportunity here for if players can not just customize the look of their character, but customize what their backstory is, maybe some of the things that they've done, they can begin to have an impact on each other's story. So we have these next-gen games coming out, and like in this one, we do have the one person that is posed differently, but the other guys are the same. But if you can let them pose differently, if you can let them build things, if this was like 3 guys, this is the co-op experience that I want. We're here, one of these players, Megan, is there, and it's like, what kind of player is Megan? Is she the kind of player who is like Buttercup? Is she kind of sassy, gets us into trouble? And then let the player choose what she wants to do so that we're in here, and maybe this is our safe zone that we're protecting. In our last session that we played together, we were able to put up some fortifications and stuff, and we're going to continue doing that, maybe go get some supplies to do it. But little do I know that in between our last session and now, Megan was out on a little solo thing where she got into trouble with some other faction. And then suddenly they come in and attack us. It's like, Megan, we are trying to lay low here, and you're off causing trouble. And she goes and stands like this because this is the gesture that she wants to do to show, you can't tell me what to do, all right? We needed that stuff, and this is how I'm going to do it. And this is the kind of co-op experience that I want, where I have to deal with the Megans of the game world, and we're telling a story together and trying to build something together and expressing things to each other. So even though we're going to continue to have co-op experiences that really resonate with this, I'm hoping that we can give players ways that they can express themselves, things that they can build together, stories that they can tell together, and basically give them a lot of tools to let their imaginations affect the gameplay experience, where we can make something amazing. Thank you.
All right, up next we have Stephanie Harvey. She is a game designer working on Secret Things at Ubisoft Montreal. She has worked on not secret things like Prince of Persia and James Noir game and things like that, but you might know her as she is a 4-time, I believe, world champion at playing Counter-Strike and plays with the Ubi United team. This is Stephanie Harvey.
All right, so I guess I decided to talk about what I know best, which is esports. When we were offered the Do or Die team, I figured I was going to talk about how making an esports game will probably kill you, because it's kind of impossible to make. But if you do try, here's my tips. So we're going to check out all of my tips. So if you don't know what an esports game is, unfortunately, you've probably been living in a cave. If you've been living in a cave, here's some of the examples of esports games. So we've known about StarCraft for a while, but there's some newcomers in the last years, like MOBA games, like League and Dota. And what we get with esports is that it's a fragile ecosystem. Just gonna raise this like this. All right. It's a fragile ecosystem, just like Hurt, where the competitive player is at the center of it. And over the last years, it was basically Lady Luck that made esports games. We wanted to make competitive game, and then it turned out a huge community caught on to some of them and created the esports that we know today. For the last 10 years, I've been involved in esports, and I took a lot of key design takeaways from it, so I'm only going to cover the design parts. But this is basically, I analyzed every successful esports games, and I said, hey, why not try to take out some of the success that they all add in common? So let's check it out. I'm looking at 2 different things. I'm going to look at how to get the player in esports, and also how to keep them in. Again, in the design aspect of it. So I have 3 main objectives for get them in. Okay, accessible multiplayers. This is easy. Free to play is super easy to have a lot of players in. But also games like World of Warcraft. So they had a 10 million player base, and then all of a sudden they were like, hey, let's make an esports game. And you know what? It had a lot of success because they had a huge player base. So if your game is accessible, if there's a lot of players playing it, and you decide to do esports, hey, it might work if you get all the other key takeaways that I'm going to show as well. High technical quality. This is basically make sure not to require a high technical quality computers. For example, Counter-Strike Global Offensive came out in 2012, and it basically required a computer that was built for 2012. What happened is that they lost a lot of market, like India, like South America, because nobody wanted to buy a new computer to play Counter-Strike. And over time, as it's 1 year from now and people are getting the computer, their player base is also increasing. So make sure to have high technical quality for low requirement computers if you're doing a PC sports game. Spectator-friendly rules. If you know a little bit about esports, you might know of the so-so success of ShootMania. What I think they succeeded is basically making the rules of their esports gameplay really clear for the spectators. So it was a 1v3 experience where you have one shooter playing versus 3, and it turned out it was really cool for spectators to understand, because you would follow one of the player trying to kill 3 players, and it was super simple, and that worked really well for my mom, for example. She likes ShootMania. It was easy compared to Counter-Strike. Keep them in. So I have 6 key, six takeaways for keep them in. Skill is important. So we're humans. If you're watching soccer, you're impressed because these guys are actually really good at what they do, right? And we can translate the same thing into games. So in FIFA, a pro esports player from FIFA will have a skill that when you watch it, you want to be like, hey, this guy is really awesome. He's really the best in the world. So if there's luck involved in your game, most likely players will not like to get killed by someone that had luck. So they will quit your game. Near perfect game balance, that's easy again. If you fall in love with one character, but someone else is overpowered, well, what's gonna happen? You're gonna quit, because you're gonna be like, well, I can't beat this guy, but I really wanna play my character because it's more important than actually playing a character I wanna win. I wanna also get involved in my game, and I really wanna play Ryu because that's what I've been playing for 10 years. So near perfect game balance is super important as well for your players not to quit. Playstyle variety. We're all humans, we're all different. A lot of players like to play defensive, offensive. The more variety you have in your playstyle, and you keep in mind you still need to be balanced, the better it will be for an esports game. Player progression, well, that's easy. Call of Duty is the best example. Yeah, we all know it. It has a lot of success, sure, but they made something good. They kept players in the hook of the progression. So whether it's because we're giving them props in the game, or whether it's because they're actually improving, like rankings in League of Legends, just make sure they progress. Make sure they don't think that they're stuck in the same place for a full year. Relevant matchmaking, Halo was one of the first to do that. You don't want to play a game where you get rocked every time. You want to feel like, hey, I might be good at this game. So relevant matchmaking will hide that the fact that most players are actually bad, and they will lose in a real match. So matchmaking will pretend that they're playing another good player, which they're probably not. And critical mass is average, and it comes back to what I just said. In League of Legends, they're doing something super awesome. I don't know if there's a lot of League of Legends players here, but let me give you a tip. You probably all suck. The mass average of the players in League of Legends is actually really bad, but everyone thinks they're really good. Like, oh, well, it's because of my teammate, that's why I sucked, or that's why we lost. But actually, no, let me give you a tip, you suck. And that's what they succeeded in doing. Everybody thinks they're good, even though they're all average. And that's a super skilled design, from the ranking system to actually making sure everybody still thinks that they're doing something in the team and they did their part correctly. So if you succeed in making sure that your critical mass is average, you might have some success at making an esports game. But remember that even if you think about all of that, you probably will not succeed, because in the end, it's the players, it's the gamers. Hey, do we like this game? Do we want to keep playing for hours and hours? And that's what makes esports games successful. And meanwhile, if you don't know if your game is going to be good or not in esports, release it, make it out, but build your community. And that's another crazy talk that I could probably plan one day, but build your community, and there's so much tools, and that's where companies are battling right now, which is from Valve, Riot, and that kind of stuff. They're battling to keep these players in, so that's what you also need to do if you want to do esports. That's it. Thank you.
Next up, we have a man who surely needs no introduction in Montreal. He is Jason Della Rocca. He's one of the organizers of this conference, ran the IGDA, is the executive director for here, and has recently founded his indie incubator, Execution Labs. Jason Della Rocca.
As you were saying Execution Labs, I just thought how appropriate the name of the company is for the theme of the... Anyways. Yeah, Trojan horse. All right, so do or die. I mean, I like this statement. I think it's pretty bold. We actually tried to make this the theme of the entire conference, but the organizers got a little bit nervous that it was a bit aggressive, so it came, what was it now? Cool stuff or something? Anyways. What's the theme? I don't know. Yeah, hotspot, whatever. So I think the interesting thing about the do or die statement is actually the or in the middle. That to a certain extent, saying or means that if you do, you're not going to die, and that they're kind of mutually exclusive. When in fact, I think the default setting is do and die. That in most cases, regardless of the efforts of doing, you're going to die anyways. And you're going to fail, and as sort of a few folks have already mentioned, there's a lot of challenges that we all face. And I think there's more that we can do as an industry to respect and sort of understand those that have died before us. There's an interesting kind of psychological trap called the survivorship bias. These are some bomber planes from World War II, which represented kind of this ideal case of this trap, the psychological trap that we have as humans, where we tend to look at the success cases for lessons and sort of guidance in what to do. And so the bombers the Allied bombers in World War II kept getting shot down. And not only were they losing these very expensive jets and the pilots and so on, but the bombers weren't necessarily able to succeed in blowing up the various compounds and bases and stuff of the enemy. And so a bunch of Americans and allies tried to sort of solve this problem, and their first epiphany was to look at all the bombers that did come back and see where the bullet holes were. And their first instinct was to patch up all of those spots on the plane. And then some radical scientists said, well, whoa, wait a second. If those planes came back with bullet holes, that's what enabled them to survive. And in fact, we're identifying the strongest elements of those planes and not the weakest. We got to go look at the planes that got shot down. And so I think looking at the failures, looking at kind of the die cases and understanding why they fail and so on is a really critical element. At Execution Labs, never mind the name of the company. Execution, by the way, means execution of ideas, not killing developers. But I should have included the slide. Actually, the first pitch deck we had, just for fun, I put a guillotine image, and we actually went out to pitch investors with that as the opening slide. I thought it would get their attention, but anyways, we changed the logo. But so one of the important things we do at Execution Labs, not only do teams look at success cases, in the same genre, style, or theme of their games, but we actually make them sort of deep dig into the failures where similar games or genres or themes are failing horribly, and trying to look at those failures or sort of dead games and understand why they went wrong, or what are those things that kind of missed from being successful. More broadly, I think of Darwin or Darwinistic sort of systems of evolution. And in a Darwinistic system, there's really three key elements. One is variation or diversity. You want a high degree of diversity, for a species to evolve and succeed and adapt in an ever-changing ecosystem. And I think for the game industry, we do that relatively well, right? There's a lot of people working on many different things, different platform styles, et cetera, et cetera. The other part is selection, right? How do you select what's fitted, what's going to survive in the environment? I think, again, the game industry, that's a pretty well understood in that it's really kind of consumer dollars that determine whether you live or die. The third piece of a Darwinistic sort of system is this idea of survivability. That any one mutation, any one sort of innovation within the species doesn't sort of take the whole species down. And to me, what that says is that you want to be able to take risks, you want to be able to do and die without sort of killing the whole company or killing your career or killing a whole project, that you can kind of, you can evolve, you can innovate, you can adapt, you can mutate, but with this sort of sense that it's actually for the greater good. And then that makes me think of sort of the Phoenix mythology, and I challenge everyone to sort of, die every day, to sort of, innovate, have the courage to get out there, push yourself, challenge yourself, knowing that you'll just wake up the next morning and sort of regenerate and keep pushing. So go die a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Next up, we have Steve Ogden, who came all the way from Maryland for this. He is the studio art director at Firaxis, where they work on these little games like XCOM and Civilization. He also, in his alternate life, is also a book author and has wrote things like a collection of short stories that I like, Headstones and Monuments, award-winning online comic Moontown, and he did the illustrations for my book on game design. This is Steve Ogden.
Thank you. Do or die. It's a pretty good phrase for the game industry. We give players things to do, and very frequently they die. If they're doing things right or if they're doing things wrong. I think many people in this room have been in a do or die situation because of the industry, because it's very fitting for our entire industry. Many times you're called upon to save the day, save the game, save the company. Do or die, heroic measures, right? In 1994, I was working for a multimedia company, and my boss came to me with a copy of Myst, and he said, hey, you should do this, by which I think he meant I should take this home and look at how they made these graphics and then make those graphics for his multimedia company. It had the opposite effect. I decided I needed to go make games. Because as an artist, I know a lot of game designers, Myst wasn't a big deal for you, but for artists, we thought that was a pretty cool thing. You could actually make pretty things back then, and so I wanted to do that. So began my do or die moment, where I wanted to do anything I had to, or die trying, to get into that company. And my portfolio was horrible. I'm not going to show you some of the things that I started off with. I wound up here in a portfolio of things that looked similar, and it was enough to get me hired 13 years ago, almost 20 years ago. My reward when I got there was, hey, you know that game you like so much? We want to make a real-time 3D version of it. And so they had me art direct this game. So it meant taking this old pre-rendered slideshow version of the game and make it in real-time 3D while still making it look the same. The problem was the level of technology at that point. Once you got here in a real-time game, it was running at about 10 frames per second. And there was a lot of internal pressure then for us to delay the game and try to figure out what we were going to do. And every time you talk about delaying a game, the Miyamoto quote comes up, right? Delayed game is eventually good, but a bad game is bad forever. I was really concerned about the way my game was going, and I talked to Richard about it on the phone, and he kind of turned that quote on its head. He's like, well, a slow game is slow only until the processors improve, but a bad game is bad forever. What both of those quotes are getting at is you have to concentrate on the game you're making. The game has to be good at its core. You're going to run into delays. You're going to run into technical problems. You will solve those things. But the only way to make the game better is by making the game better. And I think that's kind of the lesson there. And by the way, you do have to ship your game, because do or die also translates to publish or perish. If you don't ship the game, very few companies can just keep going and going and going without putting the game out. I worked at one company where we put out one game in 4 years, and I worked at another company where we put out 4 games in 1 year. That second company is still alive, but that first one's long dead. With that in mind, basically we all jumped on this do or die mentality to optimize the art, to optimize the code, and to try to get real Myst to operate at 30 frames a second on the lowest min-spec machine, knowing that every spec we dropped was more people that could play the game. And if we didn't do that, we were going to leave, kind of as Stephanie said, we were going to leave a significant section of the market out, and we couldn't do that. We did succeed, we did get it done, and we did get it in enough people's hands that it funded our next project. But ultimately, you're in the business of making games, you have to release them. You can also interpret do or die as evolve or expire, and I think that's the moment that we're in right now in the game industry. We have to kind of change the way we're doing things, what the other guys ahead of me have been talking about, kind of a new approach to what we're doing. Because, you know, AAA titles are still going for about 50 bucks. I don't really see a lot of upside to that, and yet they cost more to make every year. Middleware is more expensive, salaries are more expensive, benefits are more expensive, and so you kind of wind up in this crazy pinch. Meanwhile, players want more. They want more depth, they want more assets, they want the graphics to look better, so you kind of end up pinched. The good news is that this isn't something new. That in this world right now that we're in, where culturally it seems like remakes and sequels, or even new IP that looks like remakes and sequels, are kind of making us all be less creative, we have to find ways to be more creative within the bounds of what we're setting out to make. So some examples, once again from my career, only because I know these more than I know some of the other better examples that you may know. We remade Centipede back in 1998. This is the original from 1980, and so Hasbro wanted a 3D version of Centipede. Well, there you go, we're done, yay. No, we weren't done. We called that classic mode, and the reason we did is because we had this other mode that we wanted to do in addition. So it's, top-down, third-person, action, adventure, shooting, puzzles, and whatever else. When we made Myst into real Myst, we didn't just remake Myst in 3D, although we did do that. We also created this entire new world that people could investigate toward the end, because we identified a weakness in Myst. There was no reward for finishing that game. Now you had a present when you were done. You got this little prize. When we work on Civilization, we do a new version of Civilization. We don't just make the graphics better and slap a number on the back. We look at the game core. We look at the diplomacy changes, the way cultural pressure operates. That can change. You get new civilizations. You get new units, including giant killer death robots. Because why not? We do a game like XCOM, and I should plug that Enemy Within's out today. We didn't just remake XCOM. We didn't just make it pretty and put it in 3D, but we tried to evolve the gameplay. We tried to look at the things that worked well and emphasize those things. We looked at the things that we didn't like as much and tried to de-emphasize those. So you're not counting bullets anymore, but you're still fighting aliens, you're still commanding a squadron, you're still doing the research, and giant killer death robots. We like that. If I could sum it all up in one screen, I would do this. It is do or die time. I would say we have to innovate, ship on time, and work like it matters, because good games are good forever. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Henry Smith, who worked in the big AAA industry we've been talking about a little bit for a long time, working on things like Mass Effect 3 at BioWare, but then he decided to not do that anymore and went off and made a crazy shouting game called Space Team. I give you the indie game developer on our panel, Mr. Henry Smith.
So much like Jason, I played a bit with the title, but unlike Jason, I found it quite violent and aggressive and competitive. And first of all, I hope none of us are actually dying. I think what this means is fail. But we all know that we can learn a lot from our failures. So I decided to change this to learn. And now the or is wrong, so because we learn by doing as well. So do and learn. I'm making one final edit because I think one of the best ways to do things is by sharing them. So hi, my name is Henry Smith, and I'm gonna rant about side projects, competition, and how not to fail. So I quit my AAA job last year to go indie. I enjoyed it, but one of the reasons I quit was because I wanted to work on my own games on the side. And big companies usually don't let you work on side projects. This makes no sense to me whatsoever, because we want to hire creative, self-motivated entrepreneurs, and they will be creative on their own time. If we don't encourage this, then it will be damaging in ways that are very hard to measure. At best, these people will be demotivated, and at worst, they'll work on their side projects anyway, in secret, or even just leave the company. And I know people from all of these categories. Ostensibly, the reason big companies don't like side projects is because of competition. And this seems ridiculous to me for several reasons. Most of these projects won't even get past the prototype phase, let alone compete with a AAA game. If somehow they do compete, then not only should we be learning from that, but this kind of competition is healthy for the industry. And in the worst case scenario, where the person makes a wildly successful competing game, is unwilling to come to some kind of, sorry, my notes are too long on this slide. Unwilling to come to some kind of compromise that keeps both parties happy, and loves their side project so much that they leave to focus on it full time, then yeah, maybe that sucks a bit for you. But the alternative is to keep them working for you by stifling their creativity and preventing them from pursuing their dreams. So that was a very personal side rant, but this competitive nature permeates the whole industry as far as I can tell. We have non-compete agreements, We have non-disclosure agreements, which I also hate. We give out performance bonuses, even though they've been scientifically proven not to work in creative fields. So we need to stop focusing on competition as an industry and start working on cooperation, collaboration, and sharing. I think we should be sharing ideas, resources, technology, data, prototypes, source code, metrics, equipment, office space, possibly even people and money if that works for you. But if we work together, then there won't be nearly as much dying or failing. And I'm going to finish by talking about how I'm personally trying not to die. When I quit my job, I'd saved up enough money to last for 1 year. The goals I set for this year off were to make games, and that's it. I figured it was pretty hard to fail at that, and I knew that if I didn't make any money off my games, I would still have spent a whole year with complete creative freedom doing something I love. So it can't fail. The first project I worked on during this time was Space Team, and my goals for Space Team were to learn iOS development and the App Store, and to finish something small so that I could make better estimates for future projects. Again, it didn't matter if it made no money, and in fact, I released the game for free with only a handful of one-time in-app purchases, so I knew it wasn't going to make much. But because that wasn't my goal, can't fail. Now that Space Team is finished, I'm actually working on 2 new games, but my immediate next project is going to be a crowdfunding campaign. And this needs a bit of explanation because, unlike traditional campaigns, mine is not going to be for a specific game. I'm working on these 2 prototypes I mentioned that I'll show off in the pitch as probable projects, but the money will actually go towards my living expenses for 1 year of game development. And if other exciting things come up, I'd like the freedom to pursue those. Furthermore, the game or games that come out of this will be free for everybody, not just the backers, because I'm interested in whether this can be my primary source of income. So my goal for this campaign is not necessarily to reach the target, but to find out if people are ready to fund a developer directly instead of a game. I feel it's a much more honest way of working. If I don't reach the target, I'll just charge money for my games like everyone else. Hence, you can't fail. And that's my plan so far. To summarize, instead of worrying about side projects destroying your company, we should learn from them and share the results. Instead of competing with each other, we should share and learn from each other. And instead of judging yourself on unrealistic expectations, we should realize that everything we do will be a learning experience, and we should celebrate that. Thanks for listening.
And finally, today, it's my great pleasure to introduce the person who made probably my favorite adventure game of all time, which is Loom. Also worked at Infocom on a number of great titles before that, and has delivered some of the best game design lectures I've ever seen. So this is Brian Moriarty.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to join you here today. 23 years ago, I wrote a short article for Chris Crawford's Journal of Computer Game Design titled 4 Observations. It was a commentary on the then current state of the art in adventure gaming, based on the commercial and critical response to my latest title, Loom. The first 3 of my observations involved practical issues about storytelling and difficulty of play. But my 4th observation, titled The Holy Grail May Not Be Interactive, was more speculative, more risky, and quite deliberately, a little bit heretical. I think I wrote it because I knew how much it would annoy Chris. Here, slightly edited, is what I had to say back in the fall of 1990. Quote, "The first movies were event recordings. Popular films consisted of trains pulling into stations, waves crashing on beaches, people sneezing or getting their heads cut off. This initial lack of sophistication is quite understandable, since event recording is the most obvious way to use a movie camera. It was years before filmmakers realized that the cinema could be used to tell stories, to educate, and to persuade. Interactivity is the most obvious way to use a computer for entertainment. Unfortunately, some people in our industry, Chris, have embraced interactivity as the sine qua non of computer games. They claim that it is the essential difference that sets computer games apart from other entertainment media. It's hard to believe that a fast-moving, high-technology medium, barely 10 years old, has already discovered its ultimate form of expression. It is, in fact, highly unlikely that we have found all the ways computers can be effectively applied to entertainment. We probably haven't even discovered the best ways yet. In Loom, I experimented with the idea that emphasizing storytelling at the expense of interactivity might make adventure games more accessible to the general public. The strong reaction to the product, both positive and negative, together with its respectable sales record, suggests that there may be a market for games with minimal interactivity out there, waiting to be tapped. Interactivity is a powerful capability that should be exploited when appropriate. But let's not pursue it so doggedly that we fail to notice other possibilities. Now, I should point out here that Loom was not alone. Amanda Goodenough's pioneering Inigo stories and the Rand brothers' Manhole and Cosmic Osmo were also experimenting with simplified affordances and navigation. But the industry didn't pay much attention to me or them. That is until 1992, when Myst went to the top of the PC sales chart and stayed there for the rest of the decade. It was, frankly, embarrassing. The 90s were when 3D first-person shooters and real-time strategy games were getting really sophisticated. Studios were spending fortunes on CD-ROM games with full-motion video and Hollywood talent. But all of them were being hammered by a miserable little slideshow. Many tried to imitate Myst. No one succeeded. But the century changed. The Sims, online gaming, and sixth-generation consoles captured the attention of players and the industry. Myst faded into history, and for a time, no one seemed interested in quiet, simple little games anymore. Lately, however, a number of new titles in the spirit of Inigo, Loom, and Myst are beginning to surface. I use the word titles here because in some cases it's not clear whether these experiences actually qualify as games. A few, such as Journey, have proved remarkably popular and earned many accolades. Even modest indie efforts like Dear Esther have done respectably well. These games represent an intriguing aesthetic trend away from the explicit decision-making, skill-based challenges, and detailed object manipulation of orthodox game design. They're not games to be played, really. They're more like a movie you walk through. One of my students coined a name for these experiences. He calls them walkies. Now, it could be that walkies are just a fad or a niche. But I have a feeling we may be onto something here, taking the first tentative steps towards something really novel, something that fuses gaming technology and cinema technology in a strange new way that might prove to be more compelling than either games or movies. As it happens, this little revolution in the game industry is happening at the same time as a much bigger revolution in the movie industry. Did you know that 2013 is the last year that major studios will be manufacturing 35mm film prints for major markets? The handful of theaters that have not yet switched to digital projection must now either bite the bullet or close their doors. Soon, every screen in the world, at home and at the cinema, will be digital. Has the enormous implication of this fact occurred to any of you yet? At the Game Developers Conference in 1998, I believe I was the first to make the often repeated prediction that games would be the defining art form of the 21st century. I no longer believe this. I now believe that games were the defining art form of the late 20th century, and that the art forms for which this century will actually be remembered have not been invented yet. I believe that some brave or naive or hungry inventor will stumble upon a way to create a sense of personal, meaningful complicity in a story without any explicit affordances. History assures us that something is coming after games, after movies. If you think like a 21st century movie director, you won't see it. If you think like a 21st century game designer, you won't see it. If you want to see it, try thinking like a 22nd century historian. If you want to see it before anyone else, you must know that it is already there. It is already done. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. That's the end of the brain dump. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sticking around. Go out and try not to die.